They drove through my gate at dawn, and I watched the splinters fall like confetti. Only it wasn't a celebration, it was the moment my whole life downtowned into something ugly, small, and very loud. The truck didn't slow, the driver didn't blink, and the woman in the passenger seat, Marla Bishop, lifted her chin like she owned the road. That first 3 seconds, that one stupid sound, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an accident, it was a statement. My name is Nolan Reed, and that property behind the old cottonwood is where my father taught me how to fix things and where I taught my boy how to whistle. It's not much on paper, just a patch of scrub, a weathered porch, a hand-forged gate, but it's ours. It carries a whole lot of weight. Granddad's name on the deed. Those crooked fence posts my mother cursed every summer. The way the light breaks over the pasture in October. You don't think about that stuff until somebody comes along and decides to disrespect it like it's trash on the curb. At first, I tried to be neighborly. I waved. I fixed a tire for Mrs. Lang at the feed store. I signed up for potlucks like a guy who still believes small towns are where people look out for each other. When Marla came over that week to talk about neighborhood standards, she was sugar on top and iron underneath a smile with teeth. She called me cozy and quaint, and then handed me a glossy letter that might as well have been a gauntlet. It read like a polite thread, full of bylaws and referring to community safety concerns. What it translated to, right then, was, change the gate, or we'll make you change it. She painted worry well enough that half the cul-de-sac nodded. People like a leader they can point to when something unfamiliar shows up on their street. The HOA, which until then had been a name on a faded flyer, now had badges and men with clipboards and the sort of gentle cruelty that insists on order for order's sake. They sent letters, they levied fines, thin paper with thick intentions. I paid what I had to, not because I agreed, but because fights cost money and I had a mortgage on the memories as much as on the land. But little things kept happening. A dead animal set by the tack shed. Gates left swinging like an invitation. Tires slashed on a friend's truck when he came to fix the fence. Every time someone broke something, an HOA letter arrived promising action to fix standards, to preserve property values, and then nothing happened except another fine for me. They moved like bureaucrats who believed paperwork was an honest substitute for accountability. I started walking the property late at night, just to breathe and see what was left that was real. Night has a way of sorting people in your head. It strips the small talk and leaves the things that matter. One night, I found a camera pointed at my porch, taped to a telephone pole like a bad joke. It wasn't mine. I followed the wire, and it led to the Bishop place. I don't like cameras trained on where my daughter sleeps while I wash dishes. It's creepy, and it's unnecessary, and it's a message made of lenses. So I began to record. Not because I wanted blood or to humiliate anyone, because truth is the best defense. I mounted a few simple cameras, set them where they would catch the road and the gate, and I went through old boxes looking for deeds and county surveys. The clerk at the county office was a plain-spoken woman who liked coffee and bartered stamps. She pointed me to an obscure map tucked behind a stack of building permits. It said what I've always known in my bones. My property line was where my property line had always been. The HOA's reach had a faint blur before it even touched my land. When I showed the map to Marla, she smiled with the same teeth and said, "Well, appearances matter, Nolan. Appearances. There's that word again, like a velvet glove covering a fist. You learn a lot about a person by what they prize. Some people prize new paint and neat hedges. Others prize control. In Willow Ridge, control was currency." Marla spun it with a grin. The first few confrontations were loud and public. She'd come to a neighborhood meeting and used $10 words like capital improvements and community integrity, and the crowd would nod. She'd insinuate that my gait detracted from the look of the development, which, to her, meant I was a problem. I tried talking back calmly, like a man negotiating a fence line. It didn't work. She pivoted from charm to smear in the span of a hand gesture. I was surprised by the appetite of my neighbors to take a side. People want to belong, and an easy target helps make a club. Then the desperation began to show. A man in a baseball cap that read property management started ringing my door late nights, asking if I'd considered voluntary compliance. He'd leave brochures in neat stacks, each one a thin blueprint for erasing the quirks that made my house mine. I kept the brochures in the bottom drawer with the taxes and the faded photos. I didn't throw them away because I thought I'd need to remember exactly how far people would go to polite me out of my own life. After the gate incident, I wasn't naive enough to think any more letters would fix things. I kept records. I changed nothing except to make sure the things that made this place ours, the old gate, the porch, the crooked swing where my kid learned to shout, "Watch me," remained. But you can't live forever on stubbornness. You can't feed a family on principle. You have to be smart. There was a moment, a little before dawn, when the wind is thin and everything smells like metal and hay, when I realized the fight wasn't about a gate. It was about being seen as less, about a community choosing to define itself by what it excludes. That realization is a strange fuel. It's not the hot flare of anger that makes you reckless. It's a slow, dark heat that cooks long and steady. It clarifies what you're protecting, not just the land, but the reasons that land matters. I called an old friend, a lawyer named Carmen Alvarez. Carmen is the kind of person who wears glasses when she's thinking, like her face turns into a filing cabinet and the lenses are the keys. She read my stack of papers, the deed, the surveys, the notorious glossy letter, and she didn't laugh. She took notes. "You're not the first person to get bullied by an association," she said, "and you won't be the last. But evidence is your language. Cameras, logs, people who will swear to what they saw. We make the story airtight, and then we let the law do the rest." So we did that work. We collected the videos. We logged the dates when Marla's people drove their trucks where they shouldn't. We wrote down every conversation. We made sure the story couldn't be dismissed as the grumbling of a cranky rancher. It's not glamorous to build a case. It's paperwork and persistence and the kind of patience that makes you feel older. But it was necessary. Meanwhile, Marla escalated in ways that were petty and precise. She organized a meeting where she unveiled a community beautification plan and passed around a slideshow pictures of tidy lawns and identical mailboxes, like a Lego town come alive. She held the slides like a hymn book and nodded when people clapped. She hinted that aesthetics would be enforced. She planted whispers about safety concerns in feeds and at coffee counters. When a neighbor's fence post broke, Marla blamed neglect across the board. It was an artful dodge of responsibility, an alibi made of other people's misfortunes. When someone tries to erase you, they don't often do it with a single blow. They do it with 1,000 small things. You start to see the pattern only after it's already stitched itself into your days. Tires slashed, the gate hit again, anonymous notes tucked under the porch mat. The community that used to nod at shared joys now nodded at the idea of conformity. I felt like a man living in a photograph of himself, colors drained and edges softened to make a prettier picture. One evening, a convoy rolled down our dirt lane, 3 SUVs, dark and silent at dusk, their presence like a bad omen. They circled like vultures, then stopped at the gate. Marla stepped out, wearing a jacket that cost more than my truck. She stood in front of me with a smile carved from granite. "Nolan," she said, "we're trying to help." I told her I wasn't asking for help. I told her to go back to her meetings and leave our property to the people who live on it. Her voice dropped to a cold whisper. "This isn't personal," she said, and I've heard that before. It's usually followed by something very personal. The next morning, someone had cut the rope that held my son's swing. The chain lay on the ground like a small betrayal. Around noon, the sheriff's deputy who'd known my family since I was a kid came by and said, "Best you keep cool, Nolan. These things tend to spiral." The spiral is a word people use when they don't want to be responsible for the push that started it. I could have called it in then and let the county handle it, but I had pictures, I had witnesses, and I had a lawyer who knew how to turn stubbornness into a case. We filed a complaint. Filing a complaint is a strange thing. It feels like you are raising your hand and saying, "Please see me." But when your hand goes up, the world finally has to look. The HOA, predictably, responded by filing something too. They wrote a claim about nuisance and public safety, sprinkled with a litany of committees and bylaws that could have sprung from an old Bible. Don't let them. And so the story escalated into courtrooms and depositions, the parts of modern life that feel like a satire if you look at them from the wrong angle. There's nothing as humbling as sitting under fluorescent lights while people with agendas present neat packets to judges who have seen dozens of small-town tragedies made into paperwork. But the tapes were there, clear, indisputable, and the deed sat right where it always had. The truth, presented calmly, tends to do well in a room where procedure matters. There's a scene I remember like a cut in a film. Marla sitting stiff, wearing the same smile, only it didn't reach her eyes this time, while the projection rolled and showed her convoy crossing a line she had denied. You could see the narrative slip from her. People change when the audience isn't what they thought. Sympathy can evaporate like morning fog when the sun, in this case. A recorded video comes up. The judge didn't need a parade to come to the right conclusion. He looked at the evidence, sighed, and said words that made my chest unclench. The court finds in favor of Mr. Reed. It was not a gavel moment with trumpets, but it was the kind of relief that actually rearranges your sleep. I felt lighter and yet oddly hollow, like the attic where you've just cleared out chest after chest of old grief. But victories change people. They also make enemies. Some of my neighbors, who'd been charmed by Marla's presentations, muttered that I'd made trouble, and that community spirit was nowhere to be found. Others brought casseroles and patted my shoulder like it was a favor returned. The neighborhood divided not into easy camps, but into 1,000 smaller ripples. You can't unsee something once it's been shown. After the ruling, I thought it would settle. It didn't. Marla resigned from the board with a dignified statement, but in private, she fumed and plotted. There were anonymous flyers and late-night honking outside my house. Someone painted graffiti on the mailbox. My boy asked if it was like when the cowboys went after someone in old movies, and I told him, no, it's not like that. It's nastier and quieter. He didn't quite understand, and I didn't have a way to explain that some conflicts don't end when the judge says, so they linger in cups left on porches and in the way people avoid eye contact at the hardware store. I won't pretend every day became a different sky. Some days the wind still carried a weight of stares and gossip. But the court's decision gave me something more valuable than vindication. It gave me space to breathe, and with that space I rebuilt. Not in anger, but with the slow repair of someone who understands what matters. I fixed the swing chain with my son beside me, not because I was proving anything to the HOA, but because he wanted to laugh, and that laugh mattered more than any victory. People sometimes ask if I regret how far I went. It's a fair question and a heavy one. I regret the days I snapped at neighbors who stopped by with genuine sympathy, when I let distrust color every face. I regret being surprised that people I thought I knew could be quick to take the comfortable side. But I don't regret standing up for my place. There is a line between being a stubborn fool and being someone who refuses to erode into anonymity, and I don't like where that line is sometimes. But I know when I'm on the right side of it. There are a few scenes that stick in my throat when I think back, small, sharp moments that cut deeper than the big ones. There was the day Marla walked past my porch and didn't lift a finger to slow her pace. She allowed a neighbor to clip a rosebush near my property line and then act shocked when I objected. There was the time a contractor refused to work for me, whispering about reputational risk like I had a contagious disease. These things are petty and painful, and they teach you about the cost of not fitting into a neat box. But there were also tender, nearly sudden moments of humanity. Mrs. Lang from the feed store, who had kept to herself and her knitting, showed up with an apple pie the day after the ruling. She said, "We don't all think alike," which was her way of saying she never had and possibly never would. Hank, who runs the repair shop 3 towns over, let my son help him change a tire and taught him the finicky art of torque. People do not always align with the loudest voice, and sometimes the quiet folks will surprise you when it counts. And in that unexpected quiet after the rush of hearings and the paperwork and the late-night meetings, I began to think about what I'd actually been protecting. It wasn't a gate so much as the rituals that made life here worth living. The sound of rain on the metal roof, the way my dog would wait on the porch until I came back from the store, the smell of coffee spilling into dawn. These things are trivial and sacred, clumsy and true. They are the small human bits that become legible only when someone tries to remove them. We painted the gate not because it needed paint, but because it felt like closing a wound. We didn't build posture or walls of spite. We set our boundaries and kept the porch lamp on. People asked if I would move, if I had considered selling and going somewhere easier, somewhere people keep their hedges clipped and their patience measured. I looked at the fields and the road and my son's scuffed shoes, and I felt a weight, not the heavy weight that had once driven me to action, but a softer one: roots. What I learned, and this is the kind of learning that doesn't land until years pass, is that battles over place are often battles over identity. When someone attacks where you live, They are trying in some way to define who you are. Maybe they think they're protecting a vision of the good life. Maybe they are protecting a version of themselves that feels superior. Either way, you have to choose whether to let them define you. For me, the answer was to hold the line and make the case literally in court that our life had value not because it matched a brochure, but because it had history. When people ask what I would have done differently, I tell them two things. First, listen more to the people beside you. There are always neighbors who share more with you than you imagine. Second, keep records. I know how prosaic that sounds, but in a world where story and perception can be weaponized, a record is a kind of armor. Not the kind that tells you to lash out, but the kind that helps you step into a room and say, plainly, this is what happened. I didn't want to become a symbol. I wanted to keep my porch quiet and my son free to climb trees and my dog content to nap in the sun. But people make stories out of stubbornness, and strangers like to dress up small dramas as moral tales. I tried to remember that there are no neat winners in most fights that begin from petty reasons. There are people who learn and people who don't, and the rest is fallout. The final scene, the one that always feels a little filmic when I say it out loud, is not fireworks and not vindication. It's a simple morning. The sun comes up like it always does, and the gate is whole. My son is on the swing again, feet pumping, cheeks flushed, and I stand on the porch with a mug of coffee that isn't hot enough but tastes like enough. What I value is the right to keep the things that make life ours. If anyone tells you standing up for your property is just stubbornness, ask them what they'd do if someone decided to take away their porch light, their childhood swing, the smell of their morning. We all have small cathedrals, and sometimes they need a defense that is more patient than violent and more cunning than loud. So here's what I want from you. If you made it this far and you're still with me, tell me where the line should be. When a community enforces standards, is that protection or control? When do neighbors intervene to help? And when do they band together to erase what feels unfamiliar? I want your stories. Have you ever watched your town decide who belongs? Did you speak up, or did you step back? I'm curious how this reads to people who live in cities, and how it reads to people in neighborhoods where rules are worshipped. There's no single answer that fits all places, but there are lots of stories, and maybe, between them, we find some wisdom. Share the video if you want people to see how small battles matter. Subscribe if you want more stories about ordinary people doing strange, brave things to keep what they love. And if nothing else, take a look at the porch light when you drive by a neighbor's house tonight. If it's on, maybe someone there is keeping watch, or maybe they're just waiting for you to wave.